The story that I'm going to tell you today happened 63 years ago. It was then that a loving family man, husband, and father, as well as a successful businessman, Douglas Grinstead, left the house and disappeared without a trace. It's hard to even imagine that for many years, the family had been mourning him, and it was only decades later that they learned the shocking truth. Now, his wife and daughters, who have remained faithful to him, will have to take the rap for the sins of the head of their family and live with it until the end of their days. It all started back in 1968, when Douglas Grinstead, the owner of the profitable funeral home, kissed his wife Barbara and hugged his two daughters, and went hunting in the woods for a couple of days. It is worth noting that his wife and daughters let him go with peace of mind, because Douglas was a skilled hunter and often went hunting in the forest for several days at a time, and everything would have been fine. But when he didn't come home for over a week, Barbara got nervous, because Douglas was never gone for so long. It was worth waiting a couple more days, but then 2 or even 3 weeks passed, and the father of the family never returned home. Of course, the desperate woman understood that she couldn't wait any longer, so eventually she turned to the police. The town residents knew Douglas as an exemplary family man and a skilled hunter, so there was no doubt in anyone's mind that the man was in trouble. It wasn't long before the whole town joined the search party for the missing man. Several hundreds of volunteers searched for Douglas for about a month. The forest was combed by all the neighbors, the police, the K-9 unit, the rescuers, the FBI, and the National Guard. Even a few prisoners were assigned to the search. Photos of Douglas were hung throughout the city, printed in local newspapers and in the media. And finally, 3 weeks into the search, the first leads were found. A rescue helicopter managed to find the man's camp. There was his tent, several hunting permits, a sleeping bag, and even his car. But the problem was that Douglas himself seemed to have vanished into thin air. There were no traces of his presence and no evidence of his death. Such a strange disappearance of an experienced hunter could mean only one thing. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes, and so a decision was made to end the search. It is worth noting that even when the authorities officially called off the search, the inconsolable Barbara didn't stop trying to find her beloved husband. She hired private detectives and for many years shuddered each time the doorbell rang, hoping that her beloved Douglas miraculously managed to survive and get home. Every time someone passed by our house, Lynn and I ran to the window and looked to see if it was Dad, but it was always someone else. Beth told the reporters half a century later. She was only 13 years old at the time of her father's disappearance, and her younger sister Lynn was 11. Unable to wait for her husband's return any longer, Barbara was forced to sell the business a few months later and move with her children across the state to live closer to her parents. She soon took a job as an accountant, bought a small house in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and began a new life, all the while never forgetting her Douglas. Time went by, and 7 years later, the authorities officially declared Douglas dead. The Social Security Service began to pay the family a survivor's pension. It is worth noting that the woman received a rather generous compensation from the state. Barbara got $87,000 for several years, and her daughters got $22,000. This was quite enough for the girls to pay for college and for other needs. As for Barbara, she never got married again. Moreover, she continued to wait for her beloved husband and hope for a miracle. For years, Barbara and the girls wondered what could have happened to their Douglas. They couldn't accept his death in any way and consoled themselves thinking that he could have gotten amnesia, which could be the reason why he still hadn't returned home. Perhaps that could have been the end of this case, and it could have still been gathering dust on the shelves as unsolved. But I think you already guessed that this story soon took a sharp turn. About 1 year after Douglas's disappearance, a man showed up at the Social Security Service and said that he had lost his ID card. This stranger introduced himself as Richard Morley, and he soon got new documents. And most likely, the Grinstead family would have never learned the truth, if not for the wife of Richard Morley himself. The thing was that when the woman retired, she turned to the Social Insurance Service with the complaint that she hadn't been getting her benefits. She got an absurd reply, claiming that her husband wasn't just alive, but had also continued to earn money for many years and had even paid taxes regularly. Can you imagine that it was only in May 2015 that Morley's wife found out that her husband was supposedly alive? But the truth was that he had actually died in 1968. In the very town where Douglas lived with his wife and daughters. Of course, the FBI investigator got interested in this case, and it was he who managed to finally solve this complicated case. As it turned out during the investigation, False Morley died of pneumonia 7 months ago, this time for real. Well, I think that you've already guessed that it was the same Douglas who had disappeared in the forests of California. The man died at the age of 87, and in all the years that he was missing, he never once contacted his wife, his daughters, his old friends, or even his parents. The latter died without knowing the truth about their own son. But what really happened there, and why did Douglas disappear? Let me get ahead of myself and say that everything turned out to be rather trite. Shortly before his death, the man wrote a handwritten letter to the Social Security Service and signed it, saying, "My current name is Richard Morley, but I stole his identity. I was named Douglas Grinstead at birth, and I don't have a Richard Morley birth certificate." As the FBI found out, Richard Morley was one of the clients of Douglas's funeral home. However, Douglas never finalized his death certificate in order to steal the identity of the deceased. In 1969, Douglas received a new Social Security number. His mistress, who also left her family, soon joined him. Can you imagine? It was only in 2016 that Barbara and her daughters heard about their Douglas again. The investigator appeared on the threshold of their house and told the women that all this time their missing husband and father had been alive and well. Moreover, he worked and lived like the most ordinary family man, earned money, and even led an active lifestyle in the new place. In fact, he did not die on the hunt, but fled with his mistress. By the way, she was from a well-known family which lived nearby. Moreover, when Douglas went missing, she came over to Barbara and the girls to comfort them, and also took an active part in the search. Then, 3 weeks later, she also disappeared from the city, leaving only a note to her husband and divorce papers. Of course, many years ago, no one could have even suspected that those two events were connected, but that was exactly the case. Thus, having learned the shocking news, Barbara's heart, which remained faithful to her Douglas, was broken. She couldn't understand why he did it after 15 years of a seemingly happy marriage. But the main shock for the woman was yet to come. Soon, Barbara and her daughters received a notification from the Social Security Service, which officially demanded for them to return all the money they'd been paid. That was approximately $109,000. It was simply too much money for them, but the sisters breathed a sigh of relief when the judge ruled that their mother, Barbara, could pay $10 each month until her death, and the remaining debts will be canceled. However, 2 years later, in September 2018, the 89-year-old woman died, and the judge overturned that decision. The sisters believed that the news about their father's double life, as well as the sudden death, brought their relatively healthy mother to an early grave. On October 24th, the court ruled that the debt could be repaid through the sale of Barbara's property. However, 63-year-old Beth continues to live in this house. If the house is sold for debt, she would simply have nowhere to go. The women have filed an appeal and are looking forward to the new hearing, which could drag on for several years. As it turned out in the end, all of Douglas's relatives and those of real Morley suffered in this story. Everyone except Douglas himself, although he can no longer tell if that's the case. Well, as you can see, life can be very confusing, and even the person with whom you've lived your entire life and thought you knew may turn out to be someone very different. Friends, what do you think about this story? And what theories did you have in mind until you learned the truth? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. And that's all for today. Rate the video and see you soon.